Let's just listen to you.
Seek and ye shall find. Be careful what you wish for. In our last conversation, we talked about digging, about ancestry, and the secrets time tries to hide. I mentioned that law enforcement knows exactly what happens when the digging doesn't stop. But usually, we think of them digging for evidence. We don't think about what it's like when the shovel is pointed at us. Welcome, everyone. My name is Victor, and this is Never Have I Had the Urge to Be a Person of Interest. New York City, January 1896. The sky hung low over Manhattan's Delancey Street, heavy and metallic, pressing down on old brick buildings darkened by decades of coal, smoke, and ash. Horse-drawn carriages moved carefully across slick cobblestone, their wheels cutting through frozen slush layered with dirt and manure. Laundry lines stretched from tenement window to tenement window, garments stiff with frost twisting in the wind. The Lower East Side was crowded with laborers, immigrants, languages of all kinds colliding in the stairwells. Windows glowed faintly behind soot-stained glass. Doors shut quickly. Eyes lingered from shadowed thresholds. In neighborhoods like these, crime did not disappear into headlines. It settled into rumor, into conversation, into proximity. And it was here that a new idea began forming inside certain investigative circles. That violence was not chaos, but pattern. That human behavior left structure long before evidence was cataloged. Nearly a century later, author Caleb Carr would capture that turning point in his novel, The Alienist, imagining a New York where psychological profiling did not yet have a name, but already had a presence. The novel suggested something unsettling. Patterns exist, even when unseen. Take the case of Richard Jewell in 1996. He was a security guard who found a backpack containing 3 pipe bombs in Centennial Olympic Park in Atlanta, Georgia. He was hailed as a hero at first, but within days, the circle of proximity tightened. Because he fit a pattern, he became a person of interest. The FBI didn't have proof. They had a profile. They dug into his life, his mother's life, his past. By the time they found the real bomber, Eric Rudolph, the ground beneath Richard's feet was already ruined. Even though he was never charged, Jewell experienced what was described as a trial by media, which took a toll on his personal and professional life. He was cleared as a suspect after 88 days of intense public scrutiny, but the damage to him and his family was already done. Because once investigators begin looking for patterns, their circles start small. They begin with proximity. Who was there? Who had access? Who knew the routine? Circles expand only after they tighten. Raleigh, North Carolina, the year 1900. No towering skyline, no industrial roar. Dirt roads carried wagons past modest storefronts along Fayetteville Street. The Capitol Dome stood steady above a city of fewer than 15,000 people. In a town that size, reputation mattered. Word traveled faster than paper. Investigation relied less on science and more on familiarity. When something happened, it did not vanish into anonymity. It lingered. More than a century later, Raleigh had grown. Restaurants and bars stayed open late in areas like downtown Glenwood Avenue. Cleaning crews worked after hours. Neighborhoods stretched farther than anyone in 1900 could have imagined. And on a hot summer night in 2006, a man from a small church community was working late cleaning a restaurant. He would not make it back home. The next morning, he was found shot and killed. At first, there was no pattern. Just grief. Just questions. And when there are questions, investigators begin with proximity. My sister and her husband at the time had been members of that church. They were rebuilding their lives, sober, committed, immersed in a small community that met several times a week. Church services, Bible studies, shared prayers, shared meals. The man who was killed was a member of that church. He had helped them. He had offered employment, cleaning restaurants, pressure washing, honest work, hard work, but honest work nonetheless. On the night of the murder, my sister's husband was supposed to work alongside him, but something changed. It was their anniversary. He wanted to be home with her, so he decided to return home before reaching the job site. He asked to be taken back. The victim's son dropped him off. That alibi would later prove solid. But none of that was known the next morning. The next morning, there was a knock at the door. Police had been told he had been scheduled to work. They needed to ask questions. My sister opened the door, startled, confused, afraid. When asked if her husband was home, she initially said no. He was upstairs. She panicked. Moments later, she corrected herself. He came downstairs. He spoke with the officers. He went downtown to answer their questions. His timeline was confirmed. And then the circle shifted. Because investigations do not end when one person is eliminated. They continue moving through proximity. My sister had been home that night. She had answered the door. She had lied, briefly, out of panic. And in the absence of a clear suspect, grief searches for explanation. According to her, questioning continued. Not once, not twice, but repeatedly. She was asked to come downtown, asked to revisit timelines, asked to clarify details. Neighbors were interviewed. Church members were interviewed. Somewhere along the way, suspicion began to travel faster than evidence. In small community, that happens easily. People whisper in parking lots. Eyes linger in the pews. Conversations quiet when someone walks by. She told me after a while the church no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like scrutiny. And when you're grieving someone you cared about, someone who helped you, being viewed as a possible cause of that loss leaves a mark. Eventually, on advice from family, she stopped speaking without legal counsel present. The focus shifted. Time passed, and then a break in the case. Another violent incident. Another victim. A weapon recovered. Ballistics linked the crimes together. The man ultimately convicted, a serial offender, had been hunting strangers. The patterns investigators were searching for had existed. It just wasn't inside my sister's home. The charges were filed, convictions secured, facts were corrected, apologies were offered. But something lingered. Years later, when she retold the story, I could hear it in her voice. Some investigations close on paper. Not all of them close in the nervous system. There is an old saying, no good deed goes unpunished. But maybe that isn't quite right. Maybe it isn't punishment. Maybe it's proximity. Investigation is not an accusation. It is an elimination. It starts close because it has to. It narrows before it widens. It examines behavior, timelines, opportunity. It does not investigate emotion, but communities do. Grief seeks comfort. Shock seeks explanation. And in the absence of clarity, the closest circle becomes the loudest one. In episode 8, I talked about digging, ancestry searches, curiosity, looking backward for answers. But what happens when the digging turns around? What happens when you become the subject of questions you didn't ask? Never have I had the urge to be a person of interest. But now I understand what that phrase really means. It does not mean guilty. It does not mean charged. It means you are close enough to the event that your life becomes part of the pattern. And even when the pattern moves on, you remember what it felt like to stand inside the circle. This episode was produced by me, your host, Victor Jimenez, and edited by the lovely and talented Invisible Woman. Have an urge you've never acted on, but thought about it? What it might be like? I want to hear it. Send your thoughts or show ideas to hello@neverhaveihadtheurge.com. Until next time, thanks for joining me.